Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for having us here. For me, it is not the first time here, and I happily return to the University of Comrade. And I hope I and also my colleagues will give you a lot of food for thought. So please always keep in mind, what are the most interesting things you hear that puzzle you? What does not at all make sense for you if you think of where you live in your own autonomy, okay? Keep these questions in mind, and we will take them on in the discussion, because we want to be as interactive as possible. We will throw out some of the concepts, some of the practices, give you a very short overview of where we come from and how the autonomy arrangement looks like there. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? But then we really invite you also to share your thoughts with us and to brainstorm on how things can be improved. Because as it was said in the introduction, it's not one best practice. Might be good practices, but whether a practice is good or not so good, and I deliberately do not take the word bad, it really depends on, first, the context, and it very much depends on your knowledge, on the fact with which practice you put your context in relation, okay? So, this being said, I will go into some concepts, and I'm happy to somehow share some very basic issues just to get all of us on the same page before I will go into some more specifics with regard to one area in Italy. The area in Italy, I will present some issues. It's called South Tyrol, and it's in the very, very north part of Italy. It's a mountain area. It's an area that has been in the periphery of Italy. It is a border area. It is an area that has nowadays a lot also of cross-border cooperation. But you can imagine that obviously it had some issues and some troubles with regard of being initially a peripheral area and a border area. Okay? So, first, some concepts. When we talk about autonomy, when we talk about specific, special competences, specific contexts we live in, then we talk very often about decentralization, right? Decentralization is a key term when we study social sciences, may we study political science, law, may we study political sociology, may we have a ethnographic, constitutional approach to our studies and to understand our context and our own political system. We hear a lot on decentralization. And decentralization, if we look into the books, has been a prominent concept and the most prominent concept driven by the international community, driven and defined by academia, defined very differently in the very different contexts, in the very different parts of the globe, and defined very differently, obviously, also within Europe with regard to the different countries. May they have political systems that are defined unitary, You can have highly decentralized unitary systems. And obviously you have a very thick decentralization when it comes to countries that are defined federal countries or highly regionalized countries, okay? So decentralization is the most important reform for the last 50 years. You find that in all kinds of international documents. Why that? The reasons are many, because of the fact that decentralization can bring good governance, okay? Good governance is the overarching principle. And decentralization can also allow certain territories to have special features, to have a special political subnational system that is in place to protect minorities, okay? Both things. Decentralization can get decisions closer to peoples, to persons, for economic reason, for efficiency reason, for good governance. And obviously it can also permit then the accommodation of interests of different minority groups. So decentralization is about autonomy, is about self-governing, is about self-government. But it's not only about self-government, it's also about coordination self-government, okay? Coordination is crucial when one also decentralizes. Because, very simple, many things we cannot do alone as one level of government. We have to coordinate. We have to coordinate the challenges in different policy fields. We have to coordinate how finances are distributed. We have to coordinate how rules, laws in environment look like. We have to coordinate about which languages we speak. We have to coordinate how we talk to each other. We have to coordinate documents. We have to harmonize laws, and so on and so forth. So decentralization, what is decentralization not? Maybe it's always good if somebody tells you, oh, it's so difficult because in academia there are so many different definitions. And it's actually a maybe endless exercise to look for a really right definition. Or maybe it ends up just in having an exercise where you get mad at each other because I think differently than the other person with regard to choosing one single word that stays in a definition. So what's the way out? The way out is we ask ourselves, what is the concept not? So what does it not imply? So what is decentralization not? What is autonomy not? Autonomy and decentralization and self-government is not just simply transferring competences, okay? It's much more. It's, as I already said, also about coordination. It's about dialogue. It was mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction. So it's not about I get the competence to do something by myself and nobody else will interfere. No, many other persons will interfere, many other actors will interfere because that's necessary. Because we are all living in systems that have many layers, many interests, many challenges, many crises, and so on and so forth. What is autonomy and decentralization not? It is not about having very strictly divided competence catalogs for one level of the government and the other level of the government. But it's about the clarity of who does what and when. Okay? It's about clarifying what Comrade does. It's about clarifying what Kitchener does. It might obviously help that I clarify what the competence XY implies, so what I can do, but I still might not be able to clarify all the points because politics is dynamic. So it's about the clarity of the responsibility, it's about the clarity of procedures, it's about introducing procedures that guarantee that there is a continuous dialogue and that there is a continuous coordination mechanism. So, what is autonomy? In other words, it's about, and I already pointed to that, it's about the diffusion of powers, it's about sharing the powers, it's about deciding who can do what, and who is responsible for what, and who talks to whom, how, and when, and according to which rules. And obviously the rules should be agreed upon. So it's about, in the end, good governance. And good governance can serve the purpose of protecting linguistic minorities. Good governance can simply serve the purpose of having a good economy. Good governance can serve many, many purposes. So who is entitled to autonomy? This is obviously always the big question. I'm not giving an answer here, but this is a question to make us think about how difficult it is to decide on such issues. And we end up with the concept of territorial autonomy. Territorial autonomy is, if you look for a definition, or if you look at least for a possible way to frame it, it's the strongest institutional framework for the protection of linguistic minorities, for example, because it's confined to one territory, and therefore, obviously, it gives the geographical space that actually is there to set up a political system that deliberately takes care of certain interests of that specific territory. That doesn't mean that within the territory there is again plurality, okay? I mean, any territorial autonomy might have a special political system that protects certain interests, but then we are all mobile people, okay? I move around, we all move around, we cross borders, we have influx of persons because of several reasons. So that means also setting up a specific system for certain minority groups has also to take into account that then there might be minorities within a minority, okay? So always think that plurality is also inbuilt within the single subnational units then in the end. So there's many more when it comes to protection of minorities, there's many more when it comes to how different groups participate politically. This goes then not just from establishing a special political system at a subnational level and territorial autonomy, but it also obviously concerns the fact how electoral laws are passed. What do electoral laws say? What is the representation in the national parliament? Are there reserved seats? Are there quotas? Which are special intergovernmental relations? And so on and so forth. So the issue is that if you want to look at how autonomies work, if you want to ask yourself, let me reread how Gagauzia works. Let me reread the basic law. Let me understand the autonomy statute. Let me understand my political system. Then what could be helpful is obviously to think and to have an eye on the three pillars. So What are the institutions? How are the institutions, let's say, constitutionally recognized, protected? Which status for those who study law? Which status has the autonomy law? Is it so-called constitutionally entrenched? Which institutions are in place within the political subnational system? How do the institutions look like? How they are elected? Are they nominated? Are they appointed? Which relations do they have among themselves? Okay. Bashkan, Executive Committee, People's Assembly. What works? What doesn't work? Horizontally, within the own system. And how does it work towards intergovernmental relations with the institutions at the central level? Okay, all these questions. So this is kind of, a graphic which somehow reminds us to think about institutionals, about the institutional account, about legal guarantees, and obviously also about how politics, in a very strict sense, uses or misuses legal guarantees or institutions that are in place. Good. This being said, I'll take you now to where I come from, okay? I promise to do that as a second step. Okay. So, I come from Italy. I mean, everybody knows where Italy is. That's not a big question. I don't know if everybody knows that Italy has some parts where there are different linguistic minorities. You see them on the slide with the color red. Okay. Italy is a regionalized state. It's an asymmetric regionalized state, which has altogether 20 regions. Out of these 20 regions, 15 have a so-called ordinary statute. So they have an ordinary legislation when it comes to their subnational political systems. And 5 regions have a so-called special statute. So a basic autonomy law that is a special statute that establishes special rules because of the fact that in the regions colored in red, you do have different linguistic minorities living. I come from the very north part, so the very north tip, the very north part of Italy here. That part is called South Tyrol, and that part actually borders with Austria and Switzerland, and it's also very close to Germany. So you can see, first of all, that it is obviously very different from the islands, okay? Sicily, it's in the very south. This is in the very north. This is a mountain area. This has always been a border area. This has always been a disputed border area. There have been very painful history with regard to the moving of the borders that changed families, histories of families. And the part you see in yellow, South Tyrol, has until the end of the First World War been part of the Habsburg Empire, okay? So it has always been part of the Habsburg Empire, and that means German was the language that was spoken, And culturally it was, and it still is, very close to what you find in Vienna, in Austria. So it's Austrian culture and it's German language. That's the majority population. It has always been. Then, because of geopolitical reasons, it was forcibly annexed to what then became Italy. Then you all have heard about Mussolini, right? I see some nodding, right? Yeah, good. So fascism came, repression, politics, the German language was forbidden. About 20 years there was an issue of not being able to speak the own language of the majority population there. Cultural events were forbidden and so on and so forth. What happened then? It was several decades of dialogue, between politicians and institutions in South Tyrol and in Rome, at the one hand. At the other hand, the dialogue also was taken up by international organizations. It was also discussed at the level of the United Nations, of the Council of Europe. I don't have the time to go into details, but what happened basically is that we came up with different versions of the autonomy law, of an autonomy statute. The first one was not satisfying because there were problems with it. The second one was more satisfying. And the second one is basically establishing a system that guarantees you special relations between the South Tyrol and Rome. And these special relations, they are based on many pillars. But first of all, within South Tyrol, so within the very north part of Italy, in that area, you have a subnational political system that is based on power sharing. The power is shared between the German-speaking population group, the Italian-speaking population group, and the Ladin speaking population group. So it's not Latin, it's Ladin. It's the Rätoromanic language spoken also in Switzerland. Similar, okay. So it's 3 languages that institutionally share the power. Because altogether in South Tyrol today, there are about 130 different nationalities living, okay? So there is also some finances to promote pluralism and so on and so forth. It's not everything. But officially, basically, the whole subnational system of South Tyrol, which accommodates 520,000 persons currently living in South Tyrol, runs everywhere in 2 languages and in some parts in 3 languages, okay? This is the official system. The relations are not always easy within South Tyrol, because obviously then the Latin speakers are very, very small. They make up 4%, but still they're present in all the political institutions, because it's important to have everybody present, not just the majority group. So the relations instead with the center, are special in the sense that they were created after several negotiation rounds between South Tyrol and Rome. And now, what are the principles of these relations? One is that it is a bilateral cooperation. So there's a special commission in which both politicians but also experts sit, that are nominated by all relevant political institutions. So South Tyrol nominates some, the government of South Tyrol nominates some, The Parliament of South Tyrol nominates some. The Parliament in Rome, the national one, nominates some. The national government in Rome nominates some. And not just the fact that everybody has a say in who sits in that commission is important, but this commission of 6 persons has also to be composed of persons having different mother tongues or father tongues. So the commission cannot just be composed of German-speaking South Tyroleans or Italian-speaking South Tyrolians. It has to be a mixed commission. And even more importantly, Rome, so the national institutions, have to nominate a person that speaks German. What does this mean? That Rome necessarily has to know and to have communication channels that work very well with South Tyrol, because they have to nominate somebody of the German-speaking group. So everybody needs to know what the other does and to keep up communication with each other. So what is the aim of this special commission? The aim of this special commission, joint commission, because it's joint between 2 levels of government, because it's joint, because there are different language groups sitting in there. The aim is to talk, resolve conflicts in the distribution of competences between South Tyrol and the national institutions, first. Second, to understand whether the competence catalogue South Tyrol has an autonomy law, where there are some competences listed. Is it still okay? Must it be revised? How can it be revised? And then it is the person sitting in this commission that talk to each other, that work on how every single item can be revised. So the question would be, fine, we have now South Tyrol having a bilateral relation with Rome. But how does this work for the overall state? Because I've told you that there are 20 regions, okay, in Italy. So, I mean, you cannot just have 20 bilateral talks and then pretend that a political system works. There are also multilateral intergovernmental relations, okay? So the regions talk between them. There are some commissions, and some regions have extra bilateral relations. So it's a whole net of different intergovernmental relations. It's not an exclusive bilateral channel and that's it. South Tyrol talks with the neighboring regions, South Tyrol talks with Sicily, South Tyrol talks with Lombardy in multilateral cooperation mechanisms, and then it has also this special commission. This special commission looks like this. It's a bit complex, but basically what I have been simplifying is basically the things you see in this red box, okay? Because the overall box, if you add also the persons, so if you count 12 persons, that is yet another commission, okay? I'm not gonna deal with that. Important for South Tyrol and the relations with Rome is the commission of 6, and you here see that there are different language groups. They're put there with yellow and with red, and there is also the very tiny linguistic minority represented in the middle, okay? That takes either a seat from the Italian or from the German. This is upon negotiation, okay? Good. So, I'll end in a minute or so. That's just also to prepare the ground for Susan. And I would like to end on the question and on the note, what are, if we view it from a central authority perspective, from the national government perspective, what are the mechanisms in place to basically guarantee that South Tyrol does not go beyond its competence? And what are the mechanisms to guarantee that Rome, the national institutions, do not interfere into South Tyrol's affairs? There are several mechanisms in place. The Commission is one. They talk and they resolve and they make legal acts which clarify things. There's fixed procedures to do that. And then there are also obviously political offices dealing with it. So one office is the so-called government's commissioner. That is basically an expert, a commissioner, as the word says, that is sent from Rome to South Tyrol and has an office there and has staff there. And what is the role of this commissioner? The role of this commissioner in the past has been more relevant. Today, because of the fact that these joint commissions work very well, the role of the commission is actually very symbolic. The commissioner basically has a competence in public security in general, coordinates everything with the governor of South Tyrol, so with the government of South Tyrol, and has a rather symbolic role. The commissioner does, for example, not scrutinize the laws the South Tyrolean Parliament passes. In the past, all the laws the South Tyrolean Parliament made first passed to the government, to the office of the commissioner. Today, not. Why not? Because there is no need. Because there was trust, and because there is joint commissions, and because there's a lot of talk. So what happens when there is conflict? There is exact procedural rules that guarantee that South Tyrol can go in front of the Constitutional Court when it thinks that laws from the national parliament interfere with the competence of South Tyrol. And also, there's a special procedural rules that the central authorities can activate when they think that South Tyrol makes a law that actually is against the national interest, and so on. So these are basically the dispute mechanisms which are in place now. And I now hand over to Susan. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth, and hello, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. And I think some of you understand English, right? You don't have the headphones. Okay, so we'll communicate with you in different ways. So my name is Susanne Simolin, and I'm working more from a political science perspective, international relations perspective, and I understand some of you are also studying more of this. Is this correct? That some are studying also more political science, international relations topics? Yes. But of course, institutions or laws are very important also in our case, so I will cover both. And I will touch upon many of the same themes as Elizabeth has been talking about. Elizabeth started with decentralization. Okay, another way of discussing this is talking about multi-level governance. Did you hear this concept sometimes? Anyone? Like we tend to, I will put on my slide, because I have a state here, you know, the state of Finland. And at least in political science and international relations, often we tend to focus at state, the state level, the state as a concept. But the world is much more complex, right? Because we have power and we have things happening also in conflict resolution. If you see only the state, you see only part of the picture. The world is much more complex. You have power and you have events happening at the sub-state level, so below the state level, and also things above the state level. In our case, both in South Tyrol and the Åland case, we have the European Union level, which affects and impacts a lot what is happening in the autonomy and in the state. So we have decentralization, multi-level governance, variations or in a similar system. And then I will also be talking, just like Elizabeth has done, about separation as one part of autonomy. You kind of separate somehow a little bit your competencies and your rule from the state, but a lot of contact as well, a lot of coordination. So we have those dimensions all the time, both of them. Let me see my papers here. So, okay, so I'll take you to Finland now. So this is Finland, and I didn't put it in context, but we have an eastern border about more than 1,000 kilometers, and we have Russia to the east. And then on the other side to the west, we have Sweden. Has anyone been to Finland or Sweden or any Nordic country? Tampere University. Oh, yeah. Okay, I heard about also other contacts with Tampere, so that's nice. Okay, some have been here, very far up north. I'm happy not to be there now because in November in Finland it's very dark, very rainy. So I'm happy to be in Moldova for the instant. Summer is nice though. But so this is the Finland geographical context. And then if we talk about the historical context, so Finland was a part of Sweden. Finland and Sweden to the west were together as one country up until 1809. And at this point, Finland instead became a part of Russia. So it was part of Russia up until 1917 when Finland declared independence. So you know 1917, these were very turbulent times, right? Many things happened and Finland had the possibility to declare independence. It was not smooth. We had a civil war in Finland in 1918. So between the Reds and the Whites, so between more socialistic communist parties and those that were more, today we would say conservative, but more liberal in that time. And this was really difficult for the country, and it's something, I think it's not really until now that we have been able to more deal with this. It was also much silenced. So this was very, very hard and difficult for the country. So I want to say this because I think there is also always kind of an idea of what is the state? What is this state about? And I think this is one part to remember when we think what is the idea of Finland. It's something in between Russia and East and to the West. And we have had this has been something that has been present for a very long time. So during Soviet times, Finland was not a part of the Soviet Union, but it was really much influenced by policies in the Soviet Union. So this has been something present with Finland for a very long time. Then Finland has become more and more West-oriented, I would say. We are part now of the EU, and very recently, maybe we heard, Finland also became a part of NATO. So there has been this shift, and until this, Finland has also tried to keep a neutral position. So neutral, non-aligned, it has shifted over the years. But this is important to remember to understand the context, I think. And besides this idea of a bridge or something in between, it's also a bilingual country. So we have both Swedish and Finnish in the constitution. They are equal. And we have only 5% Swedish speakers, but still we have both languages and the same position in the constitution. And this is also because it's a heritage, right? We were part of Sweden. The Swedish was administrative language for a very long time. We have still this small minority, but it's not a minority in a legal sense because we are equal in the constitution. And the Åland Islands down here, people speak Swedish. It's Swedish speaking. This is the basis for really the autonomy, but we also have Swedish speakers along the coasts of Finland, so we are part of a bigger community in that sense. Yes, so language, culture, I was also highlight, I mean, how can you describe an identity of a state? There are so many dimensions, but I think also one thing that is important to remember when it comes to the Åland Islands, it's that rule of law and respecting international law, respecting treaties, this is something that is really important. It's seen as a part of the self-image, I think, also of the Finnish state. So this is important in relation to the Åland Islands. One last thing when we speak about decentralization. So it's a unitary state, but we have, 18 regions except Åland, but regions are not very strong. Center is strong, municipalities are strong, regions strengthened, but not at all as they are in Italy. Okay, so history, I already told you a bit of the background. And when it comes to the Åland Islands, so at this point, when Finland gained independence in 1917, Ålanders were not on board, let's say. So Ålanders there was a concern, would Finland become a communist state now, with the civil war also between the Reds and the Whites? And there was also this concern, okay, so what happens with Finland, independent state, everybody will speak Finnish, what will happen to us? So there was a concern and there was a movement, so you could call it a separatistic movement. The correct word would be irredentist, because the Swedish wanted to belong instead to Sweden. So we want to back to our motherland, okay? We want to go back to the old state where we know the language and we know the culture. And Finland did not want this. There was never violence, but there were tensions in between Sweden and Finland. And there were it was so tense that it was brought up to the League of Nations. So this is the organization that was before United Nations. And so here in the United Nations, they decided, okay, Åland will remain a part of Finland. And Finland had already said before that we will accept the solution. So what you say, we will accept. They were not happy about it. Ålanders were not happy about it because they wanted to belong to Sweden, and Sweden was not very super happy either, so no one was really content with this solution. But the solution was that Åland would remain demilitarized and neutralized. It was already demilitarized in 1856, so this is after the Crimea War, but this was confirmed and it was neutralized, and now neutralized is a different concept than neutral. So it wasn't that Åland takes a neutral position towards the world, but it's that the territory of Åland is to be kept outside of war. So if you're demilitarized, no fortifications, no militaries, keep them out of the territory at all times. In wartime, keep the territory out of war. So this is the basis. So we have the demilitarization, neutralization, we have autonomy status for the Åland Islands, and we have the protection of language and culture, so Swedish language basically in the islands. And those are the three pillars. So we need to understand this came about in an international context. It's a long story, how can you interpret those treaties and what is what, but it's said also to be, at least demilitarization, to be customary law. So it means that even there is documents, treaties, but it's also a practice that you need to keep up. So everybody should respect this status of the Åland Islands. My Russian is very bad, so I need to look at my own notes here. Yeah. So no one happy, but it was still accepted by the Finnish state. And at first it was really rough, because the first Autonomy Act from 1920 was not very well specified what should Åland do and what should Finland do. But later in 1951 there was a new act on the autonomy where they specified two lists. These are Finland's competencies, these are Åland competencies, and things started to go much more smoothly. But you see, it was not a quick fix. It took many years before it started to work, to improve and work better. So this is the autonomy, the institutions of the autonomy. Yes, I have them here. So we talked about the international entrenchment, and we talk about it's in the Constitution. So it says in the Constitution that in some aspects Åland will make their own laws, and there are also some deviations from the constitution, where the constitution does not apply on Åland. The Autonomy Act regulates what occurs in these instances. And the Autonomy Act, then, this is it's not it's also a bit complicated, but it's not really equal to the constitution, but it's just below. And as I said, in some situations, it even has deviations from the constitution, and it can't be amended by Finland unilaterally. Have to have consent of the Åland Parliament to amend the Autonomy Act. So this is a really strong protection of the autonomy. It can't be just changed by state wishes. It has to be anchored with the autonomy. And there in this Autonomy Act we have a division of legislative and also administrative competencies. I will show you in a minute. Now, actually. So here, it's in English, unfortunately. This is a division of competencies. So those you see to the left, below in blue, those are the ones that are Ålandic competencies. And you have, among others, when it comes to regulating the municipal level, you have culture, education, trade, postal services, etc. Up to the right, in purple, you have Finnish competencies. So this is also quite normal that the state would retain like foreign policy and those issues that are really central to state sovereignty. And also rights for the individual are regulated, for example, at the state level. Then you have some that are, you see, they are a bit shared. You have part of the legislation is Ålandic and part of the legislation is Finnish competence. So, of course, you need to communicate about all this, and you may need to make sure that how do we in practice then define who does what. So we, just as Elisabeth was telling you, we have a lot of mechanisms, and maybe the most important one is the legislative control. So when Åland makes laws, they had to pass through a long process going through the different delegations and that assess it. It can go also to the Supreme Court, and eventually if it's found that it's okay, it applies, it works, it's not a problem with other legislation, then the president confirms that this law has been made. And I put on one side also to the left, I put the Ålandic institutions. So we have the Åland Parliament up to the left, 30 MPs. We have the Åland government and we have the Åland administration. And to the right, we have the Finnish parliament, where Åland is a known constituency. So we have one member of the Åland parliament always. We elect this member, but it's the population of Åland that elects this person. It's not the autonomy institutions per se. And then we have the governor down here, quite new, the new governor this year, I think, and she's also elected jointly. So she's the state representative on the Åland Islands. But the president and the speaker of parliament need to agree. So it's the president that eventually decides, but the system is such that this person needs to have the confidence of the Ålanders. Sorry, how? The governor, this is the state representative. So this is the person who guides all those things that are up to the right, those things that are state competence, because the state has institutions also on the Åland Islands for those things that they need to regulate, and she is the head of them. I should clarify. Those things that are to the left down here, Åland has exclusive legislative competencies. This means that Åland can make own laws for the territory of Åland only, and the laws in Finland do not apply. And even if Åland would fail, we wouldn't make a law. The Finnish law doesn't automatically work. So there might be a void. It doesn't normally happen, but it's really in the territory. Is this clear? It might be difficult to understand. Stenka. The governor. Yeah, so if returning to the governor, the state representative on Åland, so it is the state that appoints this person, but they need to ensure that they have confidence from Åland. So they wouldn't just take someone who is, not well seen on the Åland Islands, or someone who you have had conflicts. You need to pick someone who is the population of the Åland Islands would feel. This is someone who has been working in the Åland administration for 20 years or something. So she knows this system very well. It goes also for other public state officials, that it's in the autonomy law that they should consider that this person knows things about Åland. It's not someone who just comes from the outside. Yes, I think that's it. And then, but as I said, we have we have this division, but it's not evident. You need a system to keep this up. You need a system to control that. Do we do more than we should, or who has the right to do what in practice? And sometimes there are also disputes that no, it's Åland competence, or no, it's the state competence. So there needs to be also mechanisms to deal with such questions, and in practice when things occur that are not clear, because it's not always clear. And society evolves all the time, so new situations appear all the time. And these are just some of the roles, the people, or the institutions that are involved in this. So I mentioned already we have legislative control, so we check that laws are correctly done and are within Ålandic competences. Then there are also more informal ways. If you would read the Autonomy Act, I don't think I have it here. Besides those two lists of competences, you can find side by side with Åland needs to be involved in negotiations about this issue. We need consent from the Åland Islands. We need to inform. Åland needs to be informed, or Åland has to inform the state when they do this or that measure. So this is really an important part also of the system and the Autonomy Act. And the member of the parliament that I mentioned is also a bit of an ambassador in a way, discussing at the national level, trying to make consensus and have others also understand the situation. Besides, of course, being Åland's representative in the central power. This is how Åland can affect what happens in the center. And I would say actually, as long as things do not affect the autonomy, we might say there is actually a bit of disinterest. What happens you can regulate so much at the local or regional level that as long as things happening at state level does not affect, it's not often a big debate on the Åland Islands about this. Okay, so that was the domestic level. We also have, I started speaking about multi-level governance, and that society is, as Elisabeth also said, there have been big changes in the last decades, that power moves downwards from the state into sub-state entities, but also upwards, for example, to European Union, but also into other international treaties that we need to consider and take in when we make our decisions. And also sideways, you could say that things are dispersing. You have new actors, you have NGOs, or you have lobbyists, or you have other strong powers or economical interests that will also affect the state. So it's a more diffuse system that you need to navigate. You can not only look at the state. And when it comes to foreign relations, so Finland has most competences. But Åland there is one provision in the Autonomy Act which says that if Finland enters into a treaty, an international treaty, and this affects directly, or it's within the competences or within the specific interests of the Åland Islands, Åland needs to consent to this. So the Åland Parliament needs to say okay before it enters into force fully on the Åland Islands. So this was because when Finland acceded to the EU, this meant that Åland had to give its consent. So there were a referendum, or actually two referendum, nationwide referendum, and then Åland had its own referendum. Are we going to join? Because in Denmark, which is also Nordic countries, there are two territorial autonomies, the Faroe Islands and Greenland, who are not part of the EU, even though Denmark is a part of the EU. This is a bit specific, but Åland, didn't really in practice, it would have been quite difficult to stay outside of the European Union because we trade so much with Sweden and Finland. We're so nested into this context, so it was quite needed or considered to be needed to become a part. And it has a big impact actually on the Åland Islands because now you have many regulations coming from the European level sometimes and which affect the Åland Islands, and Åland has to adhere to them. And being a small administration, it's not always easy because these regulations are very detailed. So there's a lot of work to be done in this context. And not being a state, Åland has no direct influence at the European level. So this has been solved by including Åland in national discussions so that Åland would help take part in national discussions on positions that would be put forward to the European Union. Let me see what I have more here. Yeah, and yes, I could also mention the Nordic cooperation because I find this also quite interesting. It's sometimes in political science we talk about security dilemmas, but the Nordic countries have instead been discussed as a security community, so that they started quite early to have a very close cooperation. Languages are quite similar in several of these states, and there is also similar cultural aspects. So they have been working together, and Åland became a part of this Nordic cooperation in the 1970s, and it has been formed in such a way that the territorial autonomies are almost at the same level as states in this cooperation, so you can actually participate almost fully. And I think, Elisabeth, that this is a slide for both you and me, so if you want to join me, perhaps. Are you? No, but I think if I make a conclusion or a short note about the Åland Islands first, and we make the joint thing after. So just me have my non-Russian version here. Yeah, I think the Åland system is not perfect, and yeah, I should have shown you in the timeline because it said that there would be a new Autonomy Act in 2022, and it didn't. We still do not have a new Autonomy Act because Åland and Finland has not been able to agree on this act. So there were much bigger wishes from the Åland Islands how they would want the Autonomy Act to be formulated, wanted taxation rights, which we don't have from the beginning, and more international say, and there were several issues that didn't make it to the cut, and now they are still discussing. The economical system was revised, so it was broken out, but the Autonomy Act still hasn't been renewed. So there are. It's not always agreement. I mean, there are many things that are not agreed upon, and if you would talk to Ålandic politicians, they might also have, complaints about this thing or that thing. But on the overall, if we look at it from a long-term perspective, so many problems have arose, many have been overcome, and the system, if we look at it from a conflict resolution point of view, it has worked because we don't have violence and there is a meaningful autonomy, so to say. And I think what can this depend on is also a very long discussion, but there is some kind of an agreement about the general ideas of the state, how it works and its orientation, and also about the procedures and rules that should apply. And Finland, as I was saying from the start, has put an honor in honoring agreements. So it's also Finland's example here. And I think also, this is maybe more of my personal point of view, but I think there has been a kind of problem-solving approach. When problems arise, you need to sit down and see how can we solve them in a way that would work in the general system and that we can all kind of live with. We might not like it, but we can at least perhaps live with it for the time being, and maybe next time something else will happen. So this would be my Åland conclusions, but I would really like you to join me for the final ones, Elisabeth.
So, back here. So, what are the final conclusions? Surely, like, I guess you said it also all. It's about rules. It's about clarity of responsibilities. It's about accepting that asymmetry is naturally given, and treating everybody equally does not really lead to equity. And there is a difference between equity and equality, okay? So it's about also the fact, and this leads me back to South Tyrol. Also, South Tyrol has tried to revise the autonomy law. The autonomy law of South Tyrol is from 1972, the one which is in place. So it is a booklet, about 100 different provisions are written in there. There's no reference to the European integration in that booklet, because 72, there was not the need to have the reference to European integration, but many, many things evolved. So there have been many additional laws with a special status. So they have constitutional entrenchment, they have a special status, they cannot be easily changed and amended, that integrate the statute, because it's not so easy to amend the autonomy statute. So what was the solution? To use dialogue, the Joint Commission, to come up with other additional laws that would then enhance, ameliorate the autonomy, and not necessarily to push for the only way we need to change the constitution, or we need to change the law via the very complex constitutional reforms. That was not done. So that's kind of where we are now. And yeah, it is evolved from a very poor, economically very poor area, South Tyrol. After the Second World War, it was one of the poorest areas in Italy. If you talk to economist colleagues of mine, they can give you the evidence. And nowadays, South Tyrol is one of the richest border areas in Europe, if you look into data of the statistical offices of the European Union, for example. I think we stop it here, and we would like to come back to you with the question I opened with.